I was mentioning to Kirsty earlier on when we spoke about one of the intriguing aspects of the survey that Peter Snow has for us, and that is to do with how Scottish the Scots feel now that they have their Parliament, or they're about to have it at least, and perhaps more importantly in this context, in the context of this programme, how English people feel, or how British they might feel. All those details, and it is quite interesting now with Peter Snow.
A very interesting contrast we found between the way people felt about their identity in Scotland and in England. First of all, 4,000 people in Scotland. We asked them how they saw themselves. British, not Scottish, more British than Scottish. A total there of 10% said they felt British rather than Scottish. Only 5% said they felt more British than Scottish. 26%, a sizable number of people, felt equally British and Scottish. This is in Scotland. But when we asked them whether they felt more Scottish than British, or Scottish and not British at all, look, more than half of all the people felt that one of those two categories was how they felt. 56% altogether, most of them feeling more Scottish than British. Then we talked to people in England, and look what the difference is in the picture here. British, not English, or more British than English, 16% and 12%. 28% altogether then felt British rather than English, or more British than English. Equally British and English, a hefty 41%. So the largest chunk of the people we talked to in England felt equally British and English. More English than British, or English not British, where the Scottishness had come through so strongly in Scotland, only 15% and 9%. So a quite different and contrasting sense of identity between England and Scotland.
Peter, thanks very much. Plenty there for our expert guide to the atmosphere up there in Edinburgh to chew on. That's Michael Crick. Michael, it looks very appetising, I've got to say. I think I'll have the Savoy and chips if you don't mind.
Well, that'll be fine here. They've got absolutely everything here. I mean, this is Rapido's Fish Bar here in Edinburgh, and they don't just do fish. They've got chicken, peppered chip steak, haggis, pies, Spanish sausage spring rolled, battered mushrooms. But the speciality of the house at the moment is the baked potato with haggis and turnip. This is what they've been serving here for the last few weeks. And, well, it's certainly different anyway. I've got a few of the customers here. Now, what do you regard yourself? I mean, when you fill in an application form, do you regard yourself, do you put down British or Scottish?
Scottish.
And what about you?
Scottish. Scottish as well, yeah.
I mean, do you think that's an important difference between you and the English? And does it really matter? I mean, our poll shows that most people in England predominantly regard themselves as being British rather than English.
I think the English have always regarded themselves as slightly superior. The empire was always regarded as the English empire, and I think Scots want to retain their own identity, and that's why they call themselves Scottish rather than British.
And do you think, Paul, that the fact there's going to be a Scottish Parliament now is going to help resolve these problems, or is it going to make the situation worse? And are people going to want themselves going to perhaps move towards independence?
Hopefully, yeah. I think it'd be good for Scotland. Get back what we lost years ago, and to see what it should do for Scotland.
So you'd like to see a move towards independence. What would you like to see the Parliament doing immediately?
Just a bit of profile for Scotland. So Scotland has more of a say in how it's run, so we're not ruled from down south, basically.
Max, do you see the Scottish Parliament as a move towards independence, or as a move towards preserving the United Kingdom?
I'm a bit unsure about the move towards independence. I don't know if that just stems from a deep-rooted mistrust of all politicians, no matter where they're from. I think, it's a first step. I'd rather wait and see how the first step goes before making any sort of firm decision on where I'd like to see it go next.
How do you think the Scottish Parliament, what do you think it should be doing? And do you think it should be working in a way to do things distinctively compared with the way in which Westminster has been running things up till now?
Well, I would certainly hope so, because up to now Westminster's not been particularly good for Scotland. I mean, Scottish businesses need to have their own profile internationally and in Europe. And I would hope that's what the Scottish Parliament would do.
David, you disagreed, I think, with Mags on that. You think that the Scottish Parliament should be a step towards independence. What sort of particular issues do you think it should be asserting itself on?
Well, I think in many ways, I think the Westminster government itself hasn't, I do agree with Mags insofar as it hasn't been good for Scottish business. The oil, the selling off of the oil, you've got to look at the example of the Republic of Ireland. the aid that it's gained from Europe, I think that Scotland can take the same step and actually progress as a nation independent of England and Wales.
Fine, thank you. From the Rapido Fish Bar, thanks very much.
Okay, thanks.
Oh, we're all a bit desperate here after that. Now then, let me just give you the latest scorecard that we have. Conservative gains for you, Worthing, Broadland, Bromsgrove, Craven and Malden. Those are the latest ones we have. Latest Lib Dem gains, Sheffield and Stockport. No change there from last time. Quotes of the night, as if by magic, the man sitting next door but one to me, Michael Ancram, the Conservative Party chairman, told us we are making progress, we're winning seats all over the country. This is a significant advance. And Mr Ashdown, who's not sitting next to me, said, after Liverpool last year, Sheffield is now the second great city we control. This is great news for the Liberal Democrats. It is indeed, Simon Hughes, I suppose, but then, as I said earlier on, it's a bit of a mixed picture for you, and you can't claim overall advances, can you?
Well, your figures show that we've gone up in numbers of councillors. We're going up. Don't forget, this is a comparison with 4 years ago, when we gained a huge number of seats. We gained 500 seats and a large number of councillors. So for us to go, if we end up tonight, I'm not saying we will, but if we end up with more councillors or more councillors, that would be extraordinary. I'm not saying we will. We're balanced in terms of numbers of councillors. Just compare the numbers. I mean, the number of people who live in Sheffield, which is a council we've won, the number of people who vote in Sheffield, even on a low turnout, I don't know what the turnout is many more than the number of people who vote in places like Worthing or Eastbourne. So in terms of people coming over to us, if we're making progress, I saw that Kirklees, which is Huddersfield and Dewsbury in West Yorkshire, has been lost by Labour. Now, I was up there the other day, I deduced that it will be lost because some people have come and voted for us, we've got more councillors. We are making inroads into traditionally solid Labour territory when Labour is in government, and clearly Labour voters are not happy with the Labour government. Otherwise they would have kept a Labour administration in office.
Well, I will put that point to you, Margaret, and you'll get a chance, but it seems a very good moment to actually put some of those points to a gentleman in Sheffield who actually can answer some of the questions. Jane Corbyn is in Sheffield. Jane, can I hand over to you and ask you to put some of the points to Clive Betts that Simon Hughes has been making, namely that this is down to gross dissatisfaction with the way the council has been run?
Yes, indeed, Hugh. I don't know Clive Betts, Labour MP for Sheffield, whether you heard that, but it shows that the figures that we've got so far show that the Liberal Democrats have been making inroads in Labour strongholds. You know, the vote's up by about 2% for them. What's your reaction to that?
Well, clearly we've had better nights in Sheffield as far as the Labour Party is concerned, but we've seen our vote go up in a number of our traditional seats, and our job now in the next few weeks and months will be to be a constructive and reasonable opposition, and we believe the Liberal Democrats have gained many of those seats on the basis of expectations which they simply will not be able to live up to. They've made promises when the cold, hard light of day, when they have to make the decisions in charge of the council, they're going to find it awfully difficult to square all the promises they've made to the number of people they have.
Peter Moore, you're likely to be the new leader here, the Liberal Democrat leader on Sheffield Council. What about that? Expectations that you've got to live up to?
Well, I mean, Clive would say that, wouldn't he? But we will be talking with the senior officers of the council on Saturday about the way forward, and I would hope that Clive will agree with me that what we all need to do, irrespective of the election result tonight, because Clive's a Sheffield MP, and obviously it's in all our interests to get the best we can for the people of Sheffield, and I hope that we will fight each other vigorously, of course, in the council chamber in the elections, but I will be hoping to talk to Clive and his colleagues, the Sheffield MPs, fairly shortly.
You talk about fighting with Labour. That's what's happened here in Sheffield. Obviously in other parts of the country that hasn't been the case. There's been a sort of tacit understanding between the Labour Party and the Liberal Democrats not to fight each other, but surely, Mr Moore, it shows that if you do fight them, you can win, you can do it alone.
Well, of course it shows that. I mean,
so you should be doing more of it, should you?
Well, we've been making inroads for a number of years. I mean, I think what little I've seen of the results from outside of Sheffield tonight, the Liberal Democrats are doing pretty well in traditional Labour heartland areas.
So you think you should be fighting Labour rather than, because I have to say that the BBC poll shows that the British public believe you should be working together more, not fighting each other.
I think that we provided a vigorous opposition. I hope we'll provide a very good administration. I know Clive and his colleagues will provide an equally vigorous opposition. And it's not about how much you fight with each other, it's about getting on with the job. And that's
there is a problem in Sheffield, and that's the question of opposition for opposition's sake. I think we've had that from the Liberals over many, many years. we now have a Labour government which is giving Sheffield the fairest deal it's had for an awful long time. We've got Labour MPs who want to work with the Labour government to get resources for the city. I think the challenge for the Liberals on the council is, can they actually work constructively with Labour MPs and with the Labour government to get the money and resources for this city, which is now available?
Mr.
That's
Betts,
a challenge
Mr.
for
Moore,
us.
it sounds as if you're still going to be fighting each other. Thank you very much indeed.
That's pretty lively stuff. Margaret Beckett, does that kind of exchange fill you with dread as to what might be in store for you when you're looking for partnerships with the Lib Dems, let's say in the Scottish Parliament?
No, I don't think any of it fills me with dread. I think it's quite realistic that people are expressing their differences at local level. I do think, though, that we've just had an exchange here that where both the Liberals and the Tories are grossly overstating their case. I mean, Simon Hughes talks about how wonderfully they're doing, how people are turning away from Labour. Well, they're losing councils tonight, and we took Hastings off them only last year, and we have held Hastings, which is remarkable. Michael says they've made significant advances. We are actually still holding, even on these early results, 3 seats that we won in '95, 2 of which we have never ever held before. We're holding Trafford, which we didn't win till 1997. So for a mid-term election, and I repeat, it would be the first time this century, it's something that Conservatives never managed to do, if we are ahead in overall share of the vote. These are unprecedentedly good results for a mid-term government.
Michael Ancram, if it's all as projected, and it seems to be developing that way, do you think all the speculation we've had in the press in recent weeks has been a pretty bumpy few weeks for you as a party? Do you think all the speculation about Mr Hague and his position will now go away? Is it good enough to get rid of that, do you think, or not?
And I thought a lot of that speculation was actually whipped up by misunderstandings over the last 2 weeks. What was important tonight and what we're achieving is that we are moving forward, we are winning seats, we are winning councils. We started under William Hague in 3rd place in local government in this country. We're now firmly in 2nd place and moving forward. We're seeing big swings in Worthing. I understand the swing was at least 16% to take Worthing from the Liberals. We're seeing ourselves advancing in areas of the country where we've had difficulty for a very long time. This is progress, and it's the sort of progress we need to make at this time in opposition. Margaret, if she is satisfied with losing the number of seats that she is losing at the moment and in being only 2 points ahead of us in terms of the share of the vote...
You never managed that in this century.
Well, I'm very happy. I'm very happy if that is making her happy. Certainly I can see us moving forward from a very low base, and I'm delighted the way things are going.
Thank you very much. Tony, you wanted to make a point about what was it, Tony?
Well, I'll make 2 points. I'm intrigued by what Michael Ancram's just been saying. He says the Tories are moving forward. Snails move forward as well. I mean, this is a very slow rate of progress, and I never thought I'd sit in a television studio and hear the chairman of the Conservative Party boast about retaking Worthing. I mean, that is a measure of how far behind they are. We'll come back and talk about the Liberal Democrats a little bit later. There's a lot of interesting things to be said about them.
I can't resist, Tony, because you talk about snail space, and Peter Snow has a bit of an illustration for us about the state of popularity of leaders as we approach elections and as we go through parliaments, and what that tells us about their chances of winning the election that's coming up. This graphic that Peter Snow has nothing to do with snail space. I think you'll get an idea when we see it.
Every parliament's a bit like a racetrack, really, with political parties jostling for position on the racetrack. And history suggests that the secret of winning a race is to build up as high a lead in the opinion polls in midterm as you can. And that's where we are now, in the midterm, particularly if you're in the opposition. Let's just go back over the last 6 parliaments, starting with the 1974 to 79 race. Now, look what happened then. There's Mrs. Thatcher in the blue car, leading Jim Callaghan by 12% at that midterm pit stop, exactly where we are now. She went on to win the next election quite comfortably. Well, then she faced Labour in opposition, and each time Labour managed to build up a midterm lead. First of all, Michael Foot, but a small lead, 3%. Then Neil Kinnock in the next race. Mr. Foot went on to lose that race. Then Neil Kinnock in the next race. He went on to win a 3% lead in midterm. He went on to lose that race. Then Neil Kinnock again came back, and he won a slightly bigger lead in midterm at the midterm pit stop of 7% in 1989, but he went on narrowly to lose the next election to John Major. What happened next? Well, this time in 1992-97, look at this, John Smith zooming ahead there of John Major, building up a 20% lead in midterm. He hands over control to Tony Blair. Tony Blair, with a lead like that, goes on to win the next election quite comfortably. So there's the message of that midterm pit stop picture. A big lead like that, John Smith's and Tony Blair's in 1994, a big lead like Margaret Thatcher's, goes on to help that party win the next election. Small leads don't do you much good. So where are we now? The answer is like this. Here is the red car way ahead, Tony Blair way ahead of William Hague, 26% ahead in the opinion polls at the midterm moment of this government. And that's a governing party there. That's a party likely to put on support during the next part of the Parliament. So William Hague, if he's to win the next election, has to perform miracles and totally overthrow the historical record.
Peter, thanks very much indeed. Now, let me tell you, we're talking about turnout. We think the turnout in these English council elections isn't quite as bad as we thought. It may have crept up to about 29%. It's still pretty pathetic, but, you know, it's not as bad as 26%. And some rather disturbing news at this early stage as well about the Welsh turnout in the local elections there, and indeed the elections in Wales for the Assembly. They may be, and they're not counting until the morning, they may be as low there as 35%, which for an election of that kind would be exceptionally low. We won't say much more about that at this stage. We'll see if we get firmer figures, and we'll talk about that in a few moments' time. Michael Lancrum, could I turn to you after Peter Snow's rather fetching sequence there with the race? Because what the race said fairly starkly was that you haven't got a hope in hell of winning the next election if things are as they are. Now, I'm not expecting you to say, we've lost, but do you at least accept that you are staring at a gigantic mountain?
I've always made it clear, I made it clear when I became the chairman of the party last autumn, that we had a very big mountain to climb, but you climb a mountain by starting to climb it, not by sitting at the bottom saying it looks very high. And what we're seeing tonight is not the 26% lead that Peter Snow was showing in his opinion poll record, but a 2% lead in terms of these local election results. Now, Tony King may say it's a snail's pace. I can tell you, when you've had the number of years we have of seeing our support disappearing in the opposite direction, this is a move forward. If we get over 1,000 seats, I think you'll find on Bill Bush's analysis, which was done for you before you moved to Downing Street, that he regards that as a tangible advance, and I think that that is right. We are now looking at a situation where I would hope we will make those type of significant gains. It is very much part of a process which I started off last autumn, which will lead us to victory at the next election, because we are doing it step by step. We're timing our advance, and I hope that by the time we get to the next election, we'll be in a position to have a rather different conversation with Tony to the one we were having earlier tonight.
Well, there's clearly progress. I mean, we can argue about how modest it is or not, but there's clearly progress for you. How much more progress could you have made, Michael, if you hadn't had a row, for example, in the last couple of weeks on your policy on public services? You know, people see it as a self-inflicted blow, if you can put it that way, and you might actually have done rather better tonight than you have done if you hadn't had that kind of row. Could it have been avoided, and are you not rather annoyed about it?
I mean, obviously, I always, as chairman of the Conservative Party, would prefer to avoid rows, but it was interesting, and I did a lot of canvassing over the last 10 days around the country. Obviously, our own party were concerned about the debate that was taking place within the party, but actually out on the doorstep, what people were concerned about was transport, local schools, local issues. They weren't interested in the major political debates that were taking place. And I think one of the reasons that we are making progress tonight is that we fought these local elections very much on a local basis, taking up local issues, showing that we could produce local answers to them. And I think that that is now being reflected in the advances that we're making.
Okay, Margaret?
We've just taken Wellingborough, which was a Tory target, which we didn't even take in 1995.
So does that mean it's a revolution?
It means that we are continuing to make gains on a night when we were afraid all we could expect was losses.
Simon?
It's remarkable.
Simon?
I didn't have Wellingborough on any of my particularly remarkable lists.
Why was that then?
But,
because they weren't in with the players, they aren't in most places.
I congratulate Margaret on her victory.
Okay.
I think the important thing is the sales pace issue that Tony raised and that the film showed. I mean, the Tories would expect, opposition parties, the principal opposition party would expect in the middle of the government to do very well because there's normally a reaction. And to be fair to the government have had a very successful first 2 years in terms of the public opinion, and local factors are not generally turning the people against them. The interesting area is not where there's Tory-Labour contests, where the Tories are doing not very well. It's where there are Labour-Liberal Democrat contests, where we appear to be doing much better against Labour than the Tories are.
The results are whizzing across
With
the
the
screen.
exception of Hastings and
Okay, we'll
later.
come back to the exceptions. Okay, fine. We've been getting more results in, as you know. So let me just give you the latest picture so that you know where we stand. In terms of councils, Labour having lost control of 4 at this stage. Lots to come in, of course. Tories having gained control of 8, and the Lib Dems having lost control of 6. I'm sorry, not 8. My eyesight's failing me. No overall control. No change there. And Independents down by 1. Councillors, Labour having lost over 250 at this stage, the Tories having gained over 200 councillors at this stage. Many more results to come. Liberal Democrats having gained 46 or 8. Again, my eyesight's failing me. Others minus 12. Independents up by 8. So that's the snapshot at the moment. Tony, do you think that when we get these results coming in a little further on, we'll still be able to say, for example, when we look at that low turnout of 29% as it looks to be at the moment, that in terms of the national picture, it is still, frankly, far too weak a base on which to put any sort of decent projections or conclusions?
Well, I think one can say very confidently that the Conservatives are making very slow progress. I think one can also say pretty confidently that the Liberal Democrats have really established a base in local government that is most impressive and looks like being permanent. I mean, if the projection is right and they actually get 27% of the local vote projected nationally, that will be equal to their best performance ever. One of the most striking things about the Liberal Democrat results is that we used to talk about the Celtic fringe. Do you remember the Liberals in the old days out there in Scotland, Wales, the West Country of England? Well, they're still there in the West Country of England, but they're being marginalised in Scotland and Wales, and they are the major contenders for local power with the Labour Party in most of traditional industrial England. This is a very different pattern emerging indeed.
Okay, Tony, thanks very much. We're just going to have a quick visit to Bromsgrove, where Rita Chakrabarti is waiting for us. Rita, the latest from there.
Well, the Conservatives have now regained control of Bromsgrove. They've taken 22 seats. They needed 20 to gain control. They've got 22 now. There are lots of very delighted-looking Conservatives wandering around the place. These are really scenes that we haven't seen too much of in the last few years. The Bromsgrove Tory MP Julie Kirkbride was jumping about, absolutely jubilant earlier in the evening when they started gaining their first seats from Labour. Now the story really is how many more seats can they gain? In order to get back to the level of support they had before 1995, they need 26 seats. So I think the story is now going to be, can they return to that level of support?
Rita, thanks very much for that update in Bromsgrove. Alison, I suppose one of the interesting things when we're talking about the extent of turnout, even if it creeps up to 29%, is that, you know, we're still looking at reasons why people on a vote like this don't bother going out. Is it because, for example, there's been so much attention given to Scotland and Wales that they haven't particularly realised, perhaps in some areas, that there are local elections in England going on at the same time?
That might well be the case, but it doesn't seem to have had that kind of effect in Scotland and Wales, where indeed there's much lower turnout than one would have hoped. I mean, clearly there are some areas in which one traditionally expects low turnout, and it's often been the case in the past, for example, that Labour does badly when turnout is low, but preliminary analyses of these results suggest that Labour aren't losing out particularly through this low turnout, or the Conservatives gaining indeed.
When we talk about concluding things about the way people vote, do people in various parts of the country tend to vote in exactly the same way in local elections and general elections? Do they differ for various reasons? What's the position there?
Most people vote in a local election in exactly the same way as they would in a general election, but there's a solid core, I think it's about 1 in 5, although obviously it varies from election to election, who vote differently, usually specifically in response to local issues. So, for example, they'll respond to their feelings about the composition of the local council, what they think of the council tax and so on. And the other important thing to bear in mind is that there's far less tactical voting, which is why smaller parties do much better.
We're going to take a break, Alison, because it's time for voters in the English regions to get their detailed results. Be back in a few minutes. And voters in Wales and people in Northern Ireland are still with us, I'm glad to say. Alison, you were just saying there about those factors. Which of those do you think is most interesting in terms of actually people's decision in terms of how they vote and why they might vote differently or not? Are there certain political circumstances, very big events, for example, that might actually sway them either way?
Well, certainly the key factor when people do vote differently in a local election to how they would in a general one, it's usually in specific response to what's going on locally. It's not usually protest vote, although that has happened in the past. So, I mean, in most cases, one would have to look at the area that the people are living in, what the composition of the council is, whether it's a marginal seat, whether there's been intense campaigning and so on.
Okay, that's certainly some interesting stuff for us. And I think the best plan at the moment, given that we've got a big Welsh audience, I hope, and certainly an audience in Northern Ireland, is to have another visit to Cardiff, because I was saying earlier on that the Welsh turnout might be as low as 35%, which would indeed be a very disappointing level if that is true. Gito Harry is in Cardiff, and Gito has another prominent Labour politician with him.
Indeed, Hugh. I'm joined by Rhodri Morgan, who challenged for the Labour leadership in Wales and aspired to lead the Welsh Assembly. We're looking at a situation here where Labour has a good chance of being the dominant party, but is not necessarily there in terms of an overall majority. Now, Rhodri, it's clear that whatever has happened in terms of votes and seats, that your vote as a Labour Party has slipped since the general election.
Yes, it's not been the most brilliant night that I can remember, but obviously it's some 20 years since we last had an interim election during a Labour government. And it has been very difficult to motivate Labour voters to come out, certainly in the safe Labour seats. Now, what we're hoping, of course, is that when the results start coming through from the key marginals, that the Labour vote may have held up much higher. It's all about turnout, basically, not about switchers from Labour. Have we been able to get the Labour vote out in the 6 or 7 key marginals in Wales?
And how relevant in that respect has been all the acrimony that went along with that leadership contest that you were involved in? A lot of people were alienated as far as pundits can see. Do you think that that's responsible?
I don't know. I think you'll have to do a much deeper analysis than we could talk about tonight in the excitement of an election campaign. But, you know, I think more than likely it's the contentment factor that Labour voters with a Labour government, unless there's a marginal seat and a really big fight going on in their ward or their constituency, don't really have a strong motive for coming out and vote. And that's what we found very difficult to break through.
Now, there are some people looking at these figures tonight and coming to the conclusion that Alan Michael, the Welsh Secretary, will not make it into the Assembly. Do you think very briefly that he will? And if he doesn't, are you still interested in the top job?
Well, there's several questions in one there. I've certainly not made it.
Will he get in?
I don't know. I mean, with the Plaid Cymru advance that we're talking about throughout Wales, on an all-Wales basis, he should get in, but there may be local factors that I don't know about. I have certainly not pre-booked any emergency flights to Balmoral.
And if he hasn't got in, would you be interested?
Oh, I don't answer what if or if what questions. They're thoroughly hypothetical and a pointless distraction at this stage of the evening.
We'll find out later. Rhodri Morgan, thank you very much. That's all from Cardiff for now. Back to Hugh.
Shock, Rhodri Morgan refuses to answer a hypothetical question. Well, Rhodri will brain me for saying that, but there you are. Tony King, interesting features on the Welsh result as it might come, given the level of the turnout.
Rhodri Morgan said something very significant about Wales, which is also Scotland, and that's this. You talk about the Welsh National Party, the Scottish National Party, but the striking thing about in Wales and Scotland is that those parties have not actually been national. They've had very small local bases, in Wales, for example, in Welsh-speaking Wales. But all the indications are, including from the Welsh local elections, that both the SNP in Scotland and Plaid Cymru in Wales are actually, for purposes of Welsh and Scottish elections, for the first time becoming national parties. We've seen Plaid, for example, and I think Rhodri Morgan was alluding to this a moment ago, making big advances in the Vale of Glamorgan, of all places, which has never been a Plaid Cymru heartland. So we're actually seeing new Scottish and Welsh, genuinely national party systems emerging.
Alison, we've got 20 seconds to tell us whether this turnout, if it's as low as this, actually undermines the credibility of the Assembly.
I think it probably would undermine the credibility of the Assembly, because remember that the turnout for the referendum in Wales and whether they should have one was only 50%, and the result then was on such a knife edge that its credibility was questioned even then. I think this will result in it being questioned further.
Okay, we're about to be joined once again by viewers in England, so let's take a little breather while they do that. And you're all back again. Welcome back. It's good to have your company. Let me bring you fully up to date with the position as we speak. Councils, first of all, and the scorecard reads as follows. Labour having lost control of 4 councils, Conservatives having gained control of 8 now. Liberal Democrats having lost control of 3, no change on no overall control, the NOC there. And councillors now, Labour having lost nearly 300 councillors, the Tories having gained nearly 300, the Lib Dems having gained just over 30, the others having lost 18, the Independents having gained 5. Main gains for you, the Tory gains, first of all, Purbeck, Worthing, Blaby, Forest Heath and Bromsgrove now in Tory hands tonight. They've also gained Craven, Malden and Broadland. Lib Dem gains for you, Sheffield and Stockport are their gains at the moment. And Lib Dem losses so far, Pendle, Ada, Taunton Deane and Eastbourne. And that's as we stand. And the Labour gains we've got for you so far include Walsall and Wellingborough. And the quotes of the night from some of our guests in the studio, Margaret Beckett, the Cabinet Minister, telling us we're ahead in our share of the overall vote, she says. These are good results without precedent for a mid-term election. That's the verdict of Margaret Beckett. Now, we'll be talking to Paddy Ashdown, the Liberal Democrat leader, in a short while, but I think it's worth before that seeing what Peter Snow has to tell us from the survey about the context, if you like, for the Liberal Democrat performance this evening. So let's go over to Peter.
Well, by any accounts, the Liberal Democrats have had a pretty good night. Let's just look at the share of the vote, looking back an election or two. And there you have the Liberal Democrats on 24% in the local elections of 1995. The last time these seats were elected that we've got tonight, 17% was the Liberal Democrats' total in the general election. You notice the Tories there at 31%, that was their worst ever, and there's Labour at 44%. Now watch the Liberal Democrats here at the bottom of the screen. In the local elections last year, they moved up to 25%. And in the local elections this year, we reckon their projected share is looking like 27%. They've had that sort of share before that's equal to their best share right the way through the 80s and 90s. And of course, not that far behind the fight that's going on between Labour and the Tories up here. So Liberal Democrats having quite a good night. And in fact, when you look at the changes from 1995 in terms of councils, sort of benchmarks for judging the Liberal Democrat performance, if they had 100 net gains tonight, by the end of the night, then they would really be jubilant. That is our experts' reckoning of how the Lib Dems should regard this kind of result. If they're down by 200 net overnight, then they'll be holding on, we reckon, roughly holding on to their pretty good position in 1995. Down beyond that, 300 and more, it'll be a disaster for the Liberal Democrats. So what do we reckon the likely outcome is? We reckon that by the end of the night, they could be down by something like 50. So they'll be somewhere between what we call jubilation and holding on, doing really pretty well. So a goodish night for the Liberal Democrats. When we ask people about the Lib-Lab relations, when we asked people in our poll, our election poll, about what they thought Liberal Democrat and Labour relations should be, 20% said they should end cooperation with the Labour Party altogether. 20% said they should merge with the Labour Party, and why not just become one party since they're saying much the same thing, as all cynics would say, in that sort of area. But others said, 43%, the largest group who responded to us on this question, said that the Liberal Democrats should stay in cooperation with Labour, and they'd like to see some Liberal Democrats in the Cabinet. So on the whole there, you have a clear picture. Something like 60%, 63%, nearly two-thirds of people clearly welcome the Liberal Democrats and Labour being together. Maybe there are a few cynics in there saying they might as well get together and merge. And finally, what about the new Liberal Democrat leader? Who should succeed Paddy Ashdown? Mingus Campbell and Simon Hughes getting a very small response. Charles Kennedy the clear winner, but only 15% still saying they'd like to see Charles Kennedy the winner. We had various others being mentioned. Up to 30% of people thought various other people, nobody beginning to get as high as this, but various other names were mentioned, and a lot of people, 37%, didn't know. So clearly, either not a great deal of interest or not a great deal of conviction on the part of most voters that there's a really outstanding Liberal Democrat waiting to take over from Paddy Ashdown.
Well, plenty of food for thought there. I'm delighted to say that Paddy Ashdown joins us now from his party headquarters in Cowley Street in Westminster. Mr. Ashdown, good evening.
Good evening.
Good morning. I'm sorry, Paddy, I should be saying.
It's whichever evening or morning. It's very good.
It's good to talk to you. Are you having a good time?
Actually, I am. I'm having a very good time. I mean, I thought tonight would be quite a sticky night. We had a fantastic result 4 years ago. A really incredible result. And I never thought we'd exceed that. But you want to establish the measure, we've improved on it. From that result of 4 years ago, which was our high water mark, everybody said, up 3% or 4% in the national polls. From the general election, up 10% of the national polls. We've scored a tremendous victory in Sheffield. We've held on to Stockport. In Liverpool, which was our first great city, Sheffield, of course, our second. We're governing that so well now that the vote of the share of the vote in Liverpool, Labour's great heartland, was 56% Liberal Democrats and 28% Labour. Meanwhile, in the south, we are broadly consolidating what we held, and the party I hand over to my successor is now one which is not only strong, but as a result of tonight has got stronger.
It's a mixed picture, though, Mr. Ashdown, isn't it? Because you're losing in some areas. Sedgemoor, for example, not particularly good news for you. There are others as well. So it is a mixed picture.
Oh, come on. It's a mixed picture for everybody. There are going to be gains and losses. I mean, there are for Labour and the Tories, too. In a night like this, with so many seats up, there's going to be some gains and some losses. But what I'm absolutely clear about is that the gains for us outweigh the losses massively. And to have gained Sheffield, a great jewel in the crown, second great city that we now run, to have increased by 10% on our general election poll. And I must say, the thing that really marks it out for me, to have increased even on that point that everybody said was a high water mark of 4 years ago by 3 or 4%. The Liberal Democrats, as I think one of your commentators was saying earlier on, are no longer a fringe party, no longer a party of protest, now a party of real power governing right across the face of Britain, in Labour's north heartlands, just as in the south.
Interesting figures there on the thoughts on coalition in Peter Snow's survey. Paddy, I could see on my other camera that you thought some of those figures were quite amusing. But really, the conclusion being that, in Scotland, you are looking at a position where you probably will be in coalition with Labour if the projections are correct. And surely that for you is a very happy outcome.
Look, I think we should, we've only got a few hours left, no doubt, in which you can play Gypsy Rose Lee and try and forecast what's going to happen in Scotland. Let's be patient. The results will come through in just a moment, and then we'll be able to make a calculation about what's going to happen. I mean, I'm delighted tonight by Scotland because this is a moment which I have longed for all my political life, and my party's fought for 100 years. It's a moment when the constitution of our country has changed. It will never be the same again. And the reason for that is, at least in part, because the Liberal Democrats have fought for this for so long and have had the courage to work with the party in government in order to bring it about. That alone is tremendous news. How my party does in that, I'm prepared to wait just a few more hours and resist the temptation to crystal ball gaze to see what happens.
Well, that's good. That's wise, probably, Mr. Ashdown, in the circumstances. Were you surprised by those rather paltry figures there for support for some of your colleagues in terms of your succession, in terms of the successor?
No.
No, you're not at all?
Not at all. I mean, I remember when David Steele stood down, there was no obvious successor then. And indeed, in the nature of our party, people know the party leader, but they probably don't know too many others. And if you want the reason for that, maybe you might look at the way some of our programs deal with them. But we won't get into that now. There's plenty of time for that to happen. One of the reasons I announced the fact that I'd stand down early was to let the party do it in good order and in good time. That election hasn't even started yet. People haven't even announced their candidates yet.
Really?
No, it hasn't. I mean, you'd like it to start, and you're doing your best to make it start. So the fact that nobody knows the names of my very able colleagues, any one of which could run the party extremely well, is hardly surprising.
I'm not asking you to name anyone, but you can at least confirm that there is a candidate whom you would favour above all others.
I will have a vote, and I shall cast it.
Of
but
course.
It'll be a secret one.
Have you made up your mind yet?
Listen, I will cast my vote at the time when
Simon's
I cast
waiting
it.
here, Paddy, very
I'm sure
expectantly.
he is. But you will remember the great tradition in this country of a secret ballot. I intend to stick to that.
It's good to talk to you, Paddy. Thank you very
And
much
you
indeed.
too.
Bye. Now, let's just update for you. We've got some Conservative gains, which I can tell you about, and they include Sedgemoor, which I was just mentioning earlier on. We'll just see them there on the scorecard. Up they come. Sedgemoor, which is a good gain for the Tories. St Edmundsbury, that's another Tory gain. And Hertsmere, that's Cecil Parkinson's old stomping ground, I think. Now, Michael Ancram has been telling us, and here's the quote, just in case you've forgotten it, "We're now making significant gains," he said. This is part of the process leading towards a victory at the general election. Let's go straight over to Sedgemoor because that's the scene of a decent Tory win. Dinah Lammerman is there. Dinah, what about it?
Well, as you were saying, Sedgemoor it's all done here. The Tories have won. They've taken overall control. They've gained 9 seats. In fact, the Lib Dems have lost 10 seats. And so it's a rather dramatic result for the Tories, which they're extremely pleased about. It's not such a good result for the Lib Dems across the whole of the southwest, in fact, as you've been hearing. The Lib Dems lost Taunton Deane, that's now a hung council. And in the next door council, North Somerset, the Lib Dem leader has lost her seat. So maybe a better picture nationally, but in the southwest, the Lib Dems haven't been doing so well.
Many thanks, Dinah. We'll go straight to Brighton, where Diana Medill is waiting for us. And Diana, tell us the story, and you've got some guests, I think.
Yes, indeed we do. Some of the results have been declared, and if the face of Brighton and Hove Council is changing, it's because of the minority parties. The Liberal Democrats have begun to make their mark. They've won 3 seats so far. There are a lot of seats still to declare, and the Greens have won another 2 seats on top of the one that they had already. Nick Gibb joins us. He's the MP for Bognor Regis and Littlehampton, and Ivor Kaplan is here as well. He's the Labour MP for Hove. But no Tory comeback in Brighton yet, Nick Gibb.
Well, we've held all the seats that we stood for in this council, but elsewhere in the area we're doing very well. We've gained control of Worthing, we've gained control of Eastbourne, and throughout the country we're making very significant gains for the Conservative Party.
But what's so different about Brighton that you actually haven't taken any seats from any of the other parties?
Well, the point is we're making significant and steady gains throughout the region and throughout the country. That's what's important. And I think it shows that the Conservative Party is beginning the process of re-establishing the trust with the British people. It also shows, Diana, that the Labour Party is beginning to be, people are beginning to become disillusioned with the Labour Party. The extravagant promises they made during the general election are not bearing fruit, and people are now noticing the whole range of stealth taxes, the high petrol duty, the abolition of married couples allowance, MIRAS, all these extra stamp duty, all these stealth taxes are coming through now, and people are noticing it, and this is beginning to be revealed in the falling Labour vote throughout the country.
Would you put that down to the Labour losses on this particular council at the moment, because the Lib Dems are gaining, the Greens are gaining?
Well, they've gained, obviously, at our expense. We're very disappointed to lose those 2 wards. But I think to suggest that in some way this is down to the changes that Nick Gibb said, it seems to me to be complete nonsense. I mean, the British electorate, I think, has almost contentment with the Labour government, and the difficulty has been getting people to actually come and vote. And it seems to me that it's the Tories who are failing tonight, because they failed, as you've already pointed out, to make the gains they should have done in Brighton and Hove, and we're going to retain control, which of course they'd said was impossible.
Now, we hear that the local election turnout is about 26% in England. Here it has happened to be a bit higher, partly because of the referendum on the football, but yet they're not coming out to vote Labour, are they?
Well, the turnout here is 38%, which is 3% up on 1996, and I think for democracy that's a good sign that where you have a modern local council running modern services and asking the electorate what they want, they will respond, and they have responded, because at the end of tonight Labour is going to still be in control of Brighton and Hove, which is a major unitary authority in the southeast.
Ivor Kaplan, Nick Gibb, thank you both very much. Hugh.
Dan, thank you very much indeed. And let's go over to Peterborough, where there was that neck-and-neck tussle between Labour and the Tories. Sian Williams is there. Sian, what can you tell us?
Well, yes, it has been a straight fight between Labour and Tories here. Peterborough is a hung council, no party is in overall control, and no party has dominated the scene here for the past 25 years. Now, there have been 19 seats up for grabs. We've had about half of them so far. What it tells us so far is that it might stay hung, because both the Labour and the Tories have held on to their seats. But the Tories have gained 1 seat from the Labour Party, and the seat that they've gained caused quite a kerfuffle here, because it was an urban seat, and the Tories haven't been doing very well in urban seats. They do very well in leafy Cambridgeshire. John Major's Huntingdon seat, of course, is just down the way. A lot of his cabinet were based here, but not in the urban seats in Peterborough itself. There's a lot of social deprivation, and those normally go to Labour rather than to the Tories. The main problem here tonight has been apathy. Now, we were hearing about the turnout across the country being about 26%. Here, it's been low as 20%, even lower than that in some wards.
Sian, thanks very much indeed. And you're talking about turnout. Well, we were talking earlier on about the disappointing turnout in Wales, it seems. That's been slightly adjusted to some 38% the turnout in Wales for the historic, would you believe, election for the Welsh Assembly. Not so historic that it can bring out a lot of voters, because it seems to be that that's stuck at around 38% at the moment after 23 wards and areas have been counted. So we'll update you on that. Important stuff I think we can talk about here to do with the turnout in England as well, and to do with the analysis from key wards. So let's pick up on that and go over to Peter.
Right, well, Hugh, the BBC chose 1,000 key wards, representative wards all over England, to give us an idea of how things were going. 800 of those key wards have declared so far, something like 1,800,000 voters. And on the basis of the votes in those key wards, we can calculate this change on 1995. Now remember, 1995, a good year for Labour, a very good year, Labour's best year at local elections, and the Tories' worst. So Labour, we calculate, down 10%, the Tories up 8% on a very low turnout, as we'll see in a moment, and the Liberal Democrats up 3%, and what for them was not a bad year at all. So it really has been a good night for the Liberal Democrats. Now we project the share as a result of those changes. We can project the share of the vote all over Great Britain. This, of course, is using the English results so far. Once we get the Scottish and Welsh local results, we'll be able to put a rather more thoroughgoing gloss on that. 36% for Labour, 33% for the Conservatives, 3% behind a government in midterm. The opposition should be in the lead. Most unusual to have an opposition 3% behind a government in midterm. 27% for the Liberal Democrats and 4% for the others. And the turnout. Well, in the 1995 local elections, just 4 years ago, the turnout was 37%. At a typical general election, the 97 general election, it's over 70%, 71% in the general election. And now we have a turnout projected, not the 26% we thought a bit earlier, it's now turning out a little more like 29%, which is not necessarily the lowest ever. It was about 29% last year, but clearly very low turnout in the local election compared to 4 years ago. Hugh.
Peter, thanks very much. So, Margaret Beckett, based on the 95 vote, a drop of some 10% according to Peter's latest estimates there in your share of the vote. I know that you're going to argue that you're still doing pretty well in lots of parts of the country, but that will seem to lots of people to be quite a big drop, won't it?
Well, I think I think it's very difficult to make assessments on this, because, as I say, the 95 result was unprecedentedly good for us, unprecedentedly bad for the Conservatives. But if you look at the councils that we've got results for so far, there are 4 that we took in 1995, 3 of which we'd never ever taken in history, which we're still holding. We've held 2 that we've won since 1995, in years when we weren't doing so well, and we've actually won 1. So, I mean, I think that we are doing extremely well. Of the 30 councils that the Tories were supposed to take, 6 they've taken, 6 they've failed to take. And similarly with the Liberals, yes, they're making... Last year, they lost councils in the south and won Liverpool, and they talked about Liverpool. This year, they're losing councils again in the south, and they aren't taking back any that they lost last year, and they're talking about Sheffield. So, fine, they're entitled to glory in Sheffield, but when people have Liberal Democrat councillors, they don't always keep them.
Simon?
Well, they have Liberal Democrat councillors in Liverpool who they elected last year to run the council, and Paddy gave the figure that I've been given too, that we got double the share of the vote. So if you compare people's view of our administration after a year from the Labour administration, obviously Margaret's argument doesn't hold true.
You lost Pendle.
Well, yes, there are 1 or 2 places, I have to say, where
6.
Where council, well, we're net down 3 councils from 40. We had our record year ever 4 years ago. We won 500 seats. The independent commentators we were talking about earlier were expecting us to be down about 100 or 200 on the night. We're at the moment up on seats on the night. We're down a couple of councils. Paddy was right to say that it really is, across the country, a very strong performance, and Tony confirmed it.
The only point I was making earlier, Simon, was that granted that you are making gains in some areas, and obviously from the base that you have, that would be a good thing for you, but it is a very patchy result. I'm repeating myself, but it is a very patchy result. We're just saying, I'm just being told now that you've lost Harrogate in overall control. That is a bad result for you. Why is it that, you know, we see pockets of the country where perhaps people have had a taste of you in power, and in some parts of the country it's clearly not worked? And why is that?
Well, local government is, I mean, it's a complex set of issues. Firstly, if it's a 3-way battle between the 3 parties, or a four-way battle, you get different results from if it's a 2-way battle. we are bound to be doing less well against Tories in places which were Tory forever until 4 years ago, whereas we're making progress against Labour. And sometimes it is local issues that swing it. I've been to one council where the big local issue was parking, and the people who were in charge were going to lose seats because they introduced parking.
Okay, Michael, I'm coming to you. I promise you I'm coming to you. I just need to dip very quickly into my source of pictures here and go to Bromsgrove. Rita's there with some guests. Rita, over to you.
Hugh, there's been tremendous excitement in the Conservative camp here tonight. The Conservatives have regained Bromsgrove after losing it to Labour in 1995. I'm joined now by the Conservative MP for Bromsgrove, Julie Kirkbride, and by the Labour MP for Worcester, Michael Foster. Julie, you are clearly jubilant.
We've had a fantastic night here in Bromsgrove. We've won seats that we've never won before here in Bromsgrove, and the Labour leader has lost his seat. We've had a tremendous result. And it's very much due to local issues but also to national issues. We've also had a good turnout, so people can't say that we've won because the turnout's low. We show that the Conservative Party is back in business because we were one of the swing seats we had to win to show that we are back in business.
But isn't it right to say that in fact you're only winning back what you should never have lost in the first place? This is traditional Tory heartland. It had been Tory as far back as people could remember until 1995.
Yes, it had been a Conservative council, but what I've just said is we've actually won seats we've never won before here in Bromsgrove. So we've not only won, but we've won spectacularly well, which just shows the level of discontentment with the Labour government and the appetite now for the Conservatives to be back in charge, and that's what we are in Bromsgrove.
Michael Foster, is that what it is, discontentment with the Labour government?
Not at all. It's very much a local issue, which is what Julie said, because in the heart of the Midlands we find that Labour gained Walsall, it held all its seats in Rugby, and the Conservatives failed to gain Stratford and Solihull, both traditional Tory seats in themselves. So really they've done well here in Bromsgrove, but they should have done a lot better across the heart of the Midlands.
But what is it that's made your share of the vote suffer? I mean, have your voters ignored the Prime Minister's message on television the other day, asking them to come out, to avoid the politics of contentment, to come out and vote? They seem to have ignored that.
I mean, the indication is of a very low turnout across the country as a whole, and that clearly has been to the loss of our councillors, and it's our support that has failed to turn out. Presumably they're perfectly satisfied with what the Labour government is doing and saw no need to come out and vote in local elections. It's a great pity for the many local councillors, but overall we're still the highest share of the vote, which is the first time in a long, long time that a midterm high share of the vote nationally, and that's an achievement that the Labour government should be proud of.
Julie Kirkbride, if this sort of voting pattern is reproduced across the country, is it going to be enough to provide that endorsement that William Hague needs?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, what Mike's just saying there, the fact of the matter is that nationally in opinion polls, the Labour Party is riding high. When it comes to real elections, they're not riding high at all. We are almost neck and neck now with the Labour Party in what are real elections. And despite the picture that he's given, actually there are a whole host of seats in the Midlands and elsewhere in the country that will come back to the Conservative Party at the next election, which will be a much closer run thing than present opinion polls would have had us believe. It's been a very good night for the Conservative Party.
Michael Foster, you're shaking your head at neck and neck.
I mean, when opinion polls are taken, they always comment upon how would you vote at the next general election. These are local elections, and very much they gear towards many local issues, which can account for some dramatic swings and changes and losses and upsets. When it comes to the next general election, the indications are at the moment that Labour will win not only the same size majority, possibly even increase its majority, and that's great news for Labour.
All right, Michael Foster, Julie Kirkbride, thank you both very much. That's the story tonight, a safe Conservative win here, and obviously it looks as if by a very good margin as well.
Rita, thanks very much indeed. Michael Ancram, what are your thoughts there?
Well, politics is about winning and losing, and Paddy Ashdown was saying earlier, mixed results, everybody was winning some and losing some. In fact, my count's right, we've won 17 councils and we haven't lost any. And it's still early in terms of the results that are coming in. There are many more that I expect to win over the night. And I say what I was saying before, we are making steady progress, we are making significant progress. This is what elections are about. We will have more Conservative councillors, a lot more Conservative councillors in the country after tonight. We'll have a lot more Conservative councils, and that is endorsing the fact that we very firmly again the second party in local government and moving forward from there.
Tony King, you were pretty hard on Michael earlier on. What's your assessment of that positive gloss?
Oh, I think what Michael Ancram has said is absolutely true, but he left something out because he wasn't addressing himself to this question. The Conservatives are gaining in English local authorities, but they are actually losing ground in both Scotland and Wales. Now, the Conservative Party, whatever else it is supposed to be the party of the Union. If I were sitting in Michael Ancram's chair, I would really be very worried about the fact that the Conservatives are not only not making progress, but are sliding back in Scotland and Wales. Because if the Conservatives want actually to form a government, then they do need to regain support in those parts of the United Kingdom.
I mean, is it going too far to say that they're rapidly becoming, you know, an English party?
All the signs are that they're becoming not only an English party, but a largely rural and suburban English party, and also a largely rural, suburban and southern English party. And that's really very worrying for any national or would-be national political party. One does begin to wonder whether there are going to be some more Conservative refugees fleeing from Scotland and Wales, of which,
Surely
of course,
not.
Michael Ancram was one of the earliest examples.
I'm very surprised at Tony allowing his prejudices to out in this way. I have to say that the Labour leader of Sunderland may not quite agree with him tonight about the Tories not managing to win anything outside the southeast of England.
Okay.
So one little example he's got to console him here.
We beat him in his own homeland, and I think that is something which is actually worth considering.
Before we have a bit of fun with Peter Snow again, Alison, although with a serious message, I hasten to add. A quick point there, an interesting point which was raised, which I thought you might want to comment on: national versus local issues, national versus local perceptions, if you like. What did you pick out of that?
Yeah, I mean, my point really is a plea that we mustn't compare these two opinion polls. These are local election results. They're not comparable with how people would vote in a general election. We were talking earlier on about the fact that a lot of people do vote in the same way, but a substantial minority do not. They vote in specific response to local issues. They don't vote so tactically. They might vote in protest for a different party as to the party they would vote for in a general election. And therefore, it's completely wrong to try and draw any conclusions from these elections as to what would happen in a general election.
Okay, I mentioned there that we'd be going to Peter Snow. I suppose the way to introduce this is to remind ourselves about what we were saying earlier on about Mr. Hague and the benchmark of at least 1,000, some say 12, some say 1,300 gains in terms of council seats that he needs to make this evening, or that his party needs to make during the course of the night, in order to be able to prove credibly, or claim credibly, that he's back on track, or back on the rails, I should say, given the particular illustration that Peter's now got for us. Over to you, Peter.
That's right, Hugh. Well, first of all, a quick look at the benchmark. Here are the sort of benchmarks for the Tories. I mean, the sort of way of judging how they're doing tonight. 700 gains, net gains for the Tories, would be something like disaster for them. On that dreadful year 4 years ago, 1995, 1,000 gains would be roughly par for the course. You could call that drift, if you like. Up here, recovery, one could say if they're getting 1,500 gains by the end of the night, then they could reasonably claim recovery. Indeed, Michael Ancram could be blowing a trumpet of triumph if they're up to 2,000 or so net gains by the end of the night. Now, we reckon our best assessment at the moment is that the possible outcome for the Tories is something between 1,000 and 1,400, which one has to say would be a little better than drift, and perhaps nearly allowing them to claim recovery, beginnings of recovery in terms of the local elections. But look at the vote share. Now, the Millennium Challenge to the Conservatives is rather like a roller coaster ride, really. This is the position they were in at the last general election. 31% was their share of the vote in the last general election. Where should they have gone on this roller coaster ride to be within reach of victory at the next election? So here they are, bumping along here. By the last local elections last year, they should have been way up at 40% or so. This year, in order to be somewhere like where an opposition should be in midterm, they should be at 40, 45%, 45, 50% next year, in order to have the momentum to coast home to victory at the next general election, something like 43% to win the next general election. Now, against that background, the track they should be taking, where has William Hague got so far? He likes a roller coaster ride. There he is, back at 31% of the last general election. Where's he gone since then? Well, in the first year, he bumped up and down, and he went through 33%, tiny improvement, at the last local election last year. Look, but way below where he should be. Look at that roller coaster right up on the left where he should be. And here he is now today at, we reckon, a projected share of the vote of 33%. Now, that is 2 points below the worst ever opposition share of the vote in midterm. 35% Michael Foot back in the early 80s, and you know what happened to Michael Foot. So what happens to William Hague from now on? Well, if history is correct, and of course history may be proved wrong and miracles can occur, William Hague could pull off a miracle and be charging up there on the left to join the roller coaster ride he should be on. But the chances are that he's on a downhill road and that he will be drowned at the next election unless he can pull off an extraordinary triumphant recovery against all the record books.
Well, we loved that, Peter. We really did. And Michael Ancram even laughed at that when he really did as well. You convinced, Michael?
No, that's why I was laughing. I think it's a wonderful bit of gadgetry.
Are you going to be pushing William Hague's car into the water?
No, what I want to have is a copy of that film so we can play it when I'm here for the next general election results, just to remind you of it.
Slightly more seriously, I was talking to you earlier on about this huge mountain to climb. You're still in the position, after all the jokes, you're still in the position where William Hague, if you go by historical examples that we've got, frankly doesn't stand a chance next time round.
Well, we started from a lower base than I can ever remember after the last election. And the opinion polls have shown us recently at a very low base indeed. Tonight is a significant improvement on that. And politics is about momentum. Politics is about gaining bit by bit by bit. Tonight we have taken a large step forward. And as far as I'm concerned as chairman of the party, that is what we have to do. We have to do it now. We have to carry that through into the European elections. And we have to carry it on beyond that.
Okay.
I've always believed that we can do it. What I've seen tonight and the work that's been put into these elections convinces me that we can.
Can they do it, Tony?
I don't think the Conservatives can win the next election, to be honest. I have never known a political situation before. I have never read about one, say possibly the early 1930s, when it seemed so clear, not merely to me, my view doesn't matter particularly, but to the entire political class. You talk to politicians, you talk to newspaper editors, you talk to everybody who is keenly interested in politics, and they simply make the assumption that Labour is going to win the next election, and the real question is who's going to win the next election after that. Now, no Conservative will say that in public, of course, but I've heard almost no Conservative say anything different in private. But can I just add that there's an awful lot, it seems to me, of scapegoating of William Hague going on. I actually think William Hague is proving a remarkably good leader of the Conservative Party. He has brought about a major internal reconstruction of the party. It's a much more efficient, much more democratic organisation than it was. He has done a very good job, despite the events of the last couple of weeks, in damping down the infighting that could have taken place in the Conservative Party, given the differences over Europe, given the differences over the future of the Thatcherite project. And he's been very responsive to what it was that cost the Conservatives the last election. William Hague is suffering from having inherited a very deeply divided party, and a party that became very unpopular in government. And the notion that you Conservatives' fortune by changing the leader seems to me just daft.
Can I just say, because Tony earlier said we couldn't win in the north and we could only win in the southeast. I just heard we won Derbyshire, Dales and Carlisle, both off Labour, neither of which we expected to win, which I think does show that we are making gains right across the country.
Okay.